Now, the inversion of subject and object of the gaze proposed, or rather experienced, by Alessandra is far from uncommon, especially if you allow ourselves to look sideways in space and time. So now I need to open up a brief parenthesis, perhaps not that brief. I'll try to make it brief. My area of specialty is South Asia. I'm supposedly what they call an Indianist. And I work with digital technology, so I have to kind of make a passage through there. So those of you who have come across South Asian visual culture know how, in particular in the context of Hindu devotional practices, images are a matter of reciprocity. As implied in the notion of darshan, the act of looking in this context is also an act of being looked at, an ongoing interpenetration leading to a full immersion of the viewer in the image. As Eck expresses it, because the image is a, and I quote, because the image is a form of the Supreme Lord, it is precisely the image that facilitates and enhances the close relationship of the worshipper and God. Literally replacing the divinity, the image transcends itself, foregrounding instead the act of seeing as the core of the spiritual activity. I've left out an example here which is very telling of that, but for reasons of time. There's a festival called Vishu, in which you are asked at night not to open up your eyes in the morning when you wake up. Some of the elders will take you in front of a shrine and they place you there and they tell you open your eyes and contemplate God. When you open your eyes, there's a mirror in front of you. So this is again repositioning gazing as the actual sacred act, beyond the image itself, beyond the representation, is the act of looking. So the centrality of the act of looking can indeed be found in quite a large number of practices in South Asia, such as that of marking the eyes of small children with kajal, so that they won't attract the potentially dangerous gaze of others. And indeed it can be found in other cultural contexts as well. Traveling back in European history, you can see how Byzantine art also generated interesting dialogues between viewers and viewed, the viewer and the viewed. The use of metal notably helped detaching the icon from its representational duty. It substituted the landscape surrounding the object portrayed, giving the image a kind of a decontextualized character, and anchored it instead in the lived world of the worshipper. On the surface of the thin golden layer that surrounds the icon, viewers can see themselves and the actual world surrounding them reflected. And the immersive effect would be even more grand in the churches, that will literally wrap the worshipper in the image, surrounded by visual details, by glittering lights generated by the mirroring of the candles on the metal and glass tiles composing the image. By the smell of incense and the sound of bells, the worshipper would expose themselves to a full sensorial experience, able to bring them through the senses in touch with the divine. So again, vision here combines to a set of larger sensorial practices. And indeed, these practices are still very much alive today. In the popular culture connected to Catholicism, see the use of lenticular prints with religious motifs, even called 3D prints. As I discussed elsewhere, we could also read contemporary immersive digital image-making practices as a step in this direction. 360-degree cameras, photogrammetry procedures, light filter cameras seem to threaten the conventions inherited by Renaissance perspective and strengthened by photography, offering the image a new and old duty and politics, foregrounding a sense of tactility, mutuality, and reciprocality. This is the movement of the image into the world of the interactive. So I have no time to delve into these issues here, but let me still stick for a little longer to the question of tactility. Christopher Penny has shown, for instance, how in an Indian context, images are a matter of corpothetics rather than of aesthetics. Foregrounding efficacy and presence rather than realist representation, such visual practices seem to associate the act of seeing to that of touching. In the Hindu world, as Bob points out, seeing is a form of outward reaching, a process that directly engages the object seen. Seeing is therefore a kind of material exchange between viewer and viewed, one involving not just the eyes but the whole body. One becomes, as Bob suggests, what one sees. This can hence be looked upon as a proper contagion of qualities and probably be inserted into the logic of magic. What Dundee's called a liquid logic seems to characterize this particular way of gazing, which turns the visual act into a kind of sucking out of the life energy of the image And in Hinduism, this is actually spoken of in terms of drinking from the image, or drinking with the eyes. And this is interestingly enough also what the ancient Romans and Greeks believed, that the eye had a capacity to throw out rays that would touch the things we see. And this is perhaps also what Roland Barthes had in mind when he suggested that, and I quote, "In order to see a photograph well, it is best to look away or close your eyes." Highlighting the uncanny, undecided, ever-changing meaning of photographs, Barthes opened up with the sentence to the possibility that meaning is not always explicitly inscribed on the surface of a photograph, but may reside elsewhere. And similar ideas have been, of course, at the core of Merleau-Ponty's understanding of the functioning of the image, and this is one, of course, of the fundamental sources, theoretical supports for my work. In Eye and Mind, Merleau-Ponty speaks, when analyzing the practice of painters, of the centrality of the body and of a form of transubstantiation in relation to vision. Quoting from Valéry, he says, "The painter takes his body with him," of course, with the constant use of he. And again, Merleau-Ponty, a human body is present when, between the seer and the visible, between touching and touched, between one eye and the other, between hand and hand, a kind of crossover occurs, when the spark of the sensible is lit, when the fire starts to burn that will not cease until some accident befalls the body. And interestingly enough, neurosciences too are today reaching similar conclusion. Studies on the so-called mirror neurons or Gandhi neurons blur, for instance, the boundary between self and other, between perception and action. I will not spend any time on this, but the point being that these studies show that when I look at someone doing a particular gesture or touching a particular object, my brain reacts as if I was doing it too. Yeah? So I can actually get the feeling, the sensation in my brain of the act of touching as I'm watching someone else touching. And again, this is not about the brain, but it's about but about the whole nervous system. Mirzoff has looked into that, trying to read neuroscience as a kind of a cultural narrative, and he states that our minds are evidently today continuously interacting, forming one system. So it is fascinating to notice the correspondence here, reason for me to spend a little extra time on this, the correspondence between indigenous knowledge, phenomenology, and neurosciences. All three point out that images at large, photographs more specifically, do so much more than portraying and documenting. They do things to us, they interact with us, they guide us, they merge with us. They are literally part of our whole bodies and life world. Again, this is what Alessandra acknowledged, probably, when looking at the photograph of Francesco Roncaglione. The photo did something physical to her. It gave her the creeps, and interpolated her, looked at her. He looks at me in a strange way. Of course, she understood the interruption of that gesture, but the expectation is there. So, I suggest that Alessandra's approach is far from deviant or naive, but rather that it constitutes an opening towards ways of intending photographs that, despite having been marginalized by leading narratives of realist representation, are very much present among us today. Have you ever seen someone, for instance, burning or tearing apart the picture, even just a reprint of a deceased family member? Have you? It's an extreme act, if you have. And how often do films portray widowers covering the pictures of their departed partners on their bedside tables when finally daring to enter physical intimacy with a new partner, with a new lover? And think of the necklace portraits that were so popular just a couple of generations back, or of the photos that we carry in our wallets. Are these practices perhaps not opening the door to an acknowledgement of photographs as items capable of entering a reciprocal relationship with us? In the aftermath of my father's death, this dimension became particularly evident to me. I discovered that in the office of a bank in his town that my father used to visit regularly, the personnel had set up the commemorative photograph that we had distributed above the central safe, hence making him become a kind of a guard over the work landscape. A quote from one of the people working there: "He used to come to visit us, now he looks at us from up there being not the sky but the safe." Similarly, I discovered that Vasilika, a young woman who had helped me caring for my father while in hospital, kept his picture in the kitchen, or that my friend Arturo in the village kept it in his car on the side door. So if we are to accept that these practices are part of a broader culture, then we are forced to also rethink our conceptualizations of death. Rather than appearing as a conclusion of the process of living, death appear here, as Hertz said, as a temporary suspension from life. The dead are promptly reincorporated in our lives with the help of photographs. Merleau-Ponty has suggested that, and I quote, being needs to become visible to enter the world. Merleau-Ponty was referring to the world of art. We can expand it to think of the world. This is perhaps what the photographs of the dead do. They allow being to materialize in our lives. In this context, the image is therefore, as Merleau-Ponty suggested, not a copy, not a second thing. It is, and I quote from him, the inside of the outside and the outside of the inside, allowing for a form of proper mimesis to take place, a proper fusion of viewer and viewed. These photographs allow, with their reciprocity, the thing represented to become you, the viewer, in a crisscrossing of that boundary that separates me from the other, from the world. Just like poetry, these images, and I quote here from Tausig again, they crisscross the division between the living and the dead, the state of living dead. Now let me now change with the last section the angle of observation and reflect on the act of producing photographs rather than just looking at or being looked by the photographs. So during my father's hospital stay, I became almost obsessive about taking notes. This is the anthropologist in me taking over, I guess. I guess this was a way for making sense of what we were all going through those days, and potentially for helping my father. My iPhone, a small life logging camera that I would wear on and off. You know what life logging cameras are, by the way? You know, these small cameras that take a picture every 30 seconds or every minute. You kind of wear them and they create a kind of a visual diary of the day. So that life logging camera and a very old-fashioned paper notepad kept me company in this process, helping me also to fill in the many gaps of time that hospital life imposes on visitors and relatives. I took almost daily pictures of my father and his room, recording him at night as he was struggling to breathe, or when he would share with me what was by now becoming a set of very confused memories. I guess that I was, in the first place, trying to document what was happening to him during the moments in which doctors and nurses were absent. I wanted to show them how badly he was breathing at night, how he would wake up in panic. Doctors and nurses would generally not believe in these stories and would do whatever possible to avoid tackling with that difficulty. At the same time, I guess that I was, however, also collecting his memories. If it is true that a human being's life, quote, first assumes transmissible form at the moment of his death, as Benjamin once wrote, then my note-taking was meaningful. It anticipated something that was in the making, but that I was not quite conscious about. A terrain for an ongoing struggle between awareness and hope. So my unconscious collection of elements for the making of a coherent story about my father was maybe nothing but a death sentence, an anticipation of what was about to happen. Inverting the conventional use of photography as a tool for capturing the first moment of afterlife, I was holding a visual record of every day passing by, cherishing through these images every moment of his life, celebrating it despite the disease, despite the place we were in, despite everything. Photographs, along with touching, which I will discuss a bit further in a second, were a way for me to get close to him, to enter his world. One no longer made up of words, or at least one made up of words that progressively made less and less sense. I ended up taking a last picture of him, together with me, by sheer coincidence, the night before he passed away, in response to a lovely family portrait sent by a dear friend of mine from Iran. So my note-taking was just the other side of another strictly mimetic activity that I got engaged with during my father's hospital stay. With verbal communication being largely suspended, I took to physical contact as the sole way to communicate with him. An utterly irrational man who had never given too much time and attention to bodily expressions of affection, my father was now a concoction of impulses and reactions. While he may at times not even recognize me, he would still prove capable of relaxing whenever my hand would touch his arm, caress his forehead, or massage his feet. This physical contact and proximity with him allowed me to gain some kind of entrance into his world. Surely, it allowed his world to enter me. As many other individuals who have assisted seriously or terminally ill patients would also confirm, I have a past in medical anthropology, by the way. That's where I started, so that's part of my interest comes from there. So I started developing the same symptoms that my father was suffering from. I would feel the need to pee very often, forget the names of people surrounding me. I would at times experience problems in breathing, wake up in the middle of the night trying to slit my chest open with my hands. I would feel my heart racing while sitting still, and I would lose weight, process which has not halted yet. Mimesis was obviously my primary way of communicating with my father. And once he passed away, his symptoms remained with me for quite some time. Death stayed with me for months, for a year, and I can at times still smell it and breathe it. Photography remained a tool in my handling this new condition as an orphan, being a middle-aged one, central in the aftermath of my father's death. I kept photographing his dead body, but also, and perhaps more importantly, I kept portraying his life world, the rehab center where he spent his last days, his home, the old house in which I was raised, and that was now doomed to emptiness. I did not do this consciously or systematically. The camera was simply there, a companion helping me translating what I felt, what I saw, what I perceived, in an act that Zahid Chaudhry would call of traumatic repetition. An act crystallizing, quoting from him again, the intimate relationship between trauma and play, both united by means of repetition. You could say that I performed my grief, my mourning, with the help of photographs.